Somebody has said it to you, maybe at a funeral, maybe in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning, when your whole world had just come apart. They put a hand on your shoulder, and they said the kindest thing they knew how to say: God won't give you more than you can handle. Here's the thing, nobody tells you at that moment. That sentence is not in the Bible. It isn't in Genesis, it isn't in the Psalms, it isn't in anything Jesus said, it isn't in a single letter Paul ever wrote. Search every translation, cover to cover. It is not there. And when you find out what is there instead, you may feel something loosen in your chest that has been tight for years. Because the real verse, the one people are half remembering when they say that, turns on a single Greek word, and that word does not mean suffering. Stay with me, and I'll show you the sentence the Bible actually gives you for the worst night of your life. It is stronger than the one on the coffee mug. Real quick, because this is what this channel exists for. We take the verses you grew up hearing and trace them back to the original Hebrew and Greek, the words your English Bible quietly buried. No lectures, no judgment, just what the text actually says. If that's the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe and stay. This one's going to matter. Let me be straight with you about something. For a long time, I believed that line was scripture. I'd heard it my whole life. I probably said it to someone myself. It sounds like the Bible. It has that shape, that calm, promise-shaped ring to it. It wasn't until I actually went looking for it, chapter and verse, that I realized I could not find it anywhere. And that bothered me, because if it isn't in the Bible, then where did we get it? And why do we say it to people on the very worst days of their lives? And here's what surprised me most. It's not alone. There's a whole shelf of these. God helps those who help themselves. People swear that's in there. It isn't. That one traces back to a Greek fable and an Old English politician. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Not scripture. That's a line from a preacher's sermon. This too shall pass. Beautiful, ancient, and nowhere in the Bible. We have quietly written our own book of scripture that isn't, and then we hand it to each other in the hardest moments of our lives, wrapped in the authority of God. So it was worth asking, where did this one come from, and what got lost on the way? So I did what this channel does. I went back to the words, and the trail led to one verse, a real one, that almost everyone has heard, and almost no one has read closely. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. In the old King James it reads, "There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape." Read it slowly, and you notice something. It never mentions suffering. It never mentions loss or grief or the thing you're carrying tonight. There's a different word sitting right in the middle of it, and everything hangs on that word. The word is temptation. In Greek, peirasmos, and here's where the English quietly leads us off course. When you and I hear temptation, we think of small things, a second slice of cake, an ex texting at midnight, or we stretch it the other way and make it mean any hardship at all, any pain, anything heavy. But peirasmos doesn't mean pain. It comes from a root that means to test, to try, to put someone under pressure to see which way they'll break. A peirasmos is a moment where you're being pulled toward doing the wrong thing, toward abandoning what you believe. It's a crossroads, not a wound. And you don't have to take my word for it. Paul tells you himself one verse later. The very next line is, "Flee from idolatry." The whole chapter is a warning to a church surrounded by pagan temples, tempted to slide back into worshiping idols. That is the peirasmos Paul is talking about, not your diagnosis, not the phone call you're dreading, the pull to walk away from God. And Paul isn't being abstract here. Go back up a few verses, and you'll see exactly which testing he means. The first half of the chapter is a roll call of the wilderness, the people who came out of Egypt. They all walked through the sea. They all ate the bread from heaven. And then, Paul says, most of them fell. They built a golden calf. They grumbled. They craved the wrong things until it destroyed them. That's his list of peirasmos. Not life got hard. Every single one is a moment where they were pulled to trade the living God for something easier, and they took the trade. That's the temptation common to man the verse is talking about. The same pull that broke a whole generation in the desert. So when Paul promises you won't be tempted beyond what you can bear, he is making a promise about that, about sin. He's saying you will never be cornered into betraying what you love. That door will always be there, and that is a very different promise than your life will never get too heavy. Which brings us to the most beautiful word in the whole verse, and the one your English Bible almost hides. Paul says, God will make a way to escape. In Greek, that's one word, ekbasis, and it's a picture word. Ek means out of, basis means a step, a way through. An ekbasis is a mountain pass, a door in a wall, a path out of a place you thought had no exit. Now hold the two words together, because this is the whole thing. The verse is not saying, I'll measure your pain so it never exceeds your strength. It's saying, when you are pulled toward the wrong thing, I will always, always leave a door open so you can walk out. The promise isn't a ceiling on how much you can hurt. It's an exit from every temptation to give up on God. And Paul's readers would have heard that word and thought of one thing, because he just spent 10 verses on the people who came out of Egypt, and the great ekbasis of the whole Old Testament is the one they lived, a wall of water and a dry path opening straight through the middle of it, a door in the sea where a second ago there was no door at all. That's the image sitting underneath this verse. Not a God who shrinks the ocean so you can wade across, a God who splits it open and says, walk. The way out is Exodus shaped. It always has been. And do you feel the difference? One version makes God the manager of your suffering, carefully rationing it out, drop by drop, so you can handle it. The other makes God the one who stands at the end of the dark hallway holding a door open. The folk saying gives you a God with a measuring cup. The real verse gives you a God with a key. Look at even how the verse ends. Not so you can handle it. The old King James says, God makes the way out, that ye may be able to bear it. Bear it, to be carried through something, the way you carry a weight across a room by getting underneath it, not by making it lighter. The word we swapped in, handle, sounds like management. Cope, keep it together, deal with it on your own. But the word that's actually there is about being carried through. Even the promised outcome was never, you'll be strong enough to manage. It was, you'll be brought out the other side. Those are not the same sentence. One leaves you alone with the weight. The other walks you to the door. So how did we get from that, a promise about escaping temptation, to a coffee mug line about handling hardship? You can almost watch it happen. Somewhere along the way, you will not be tempted above what you are able, got shortened. Tempted fell away. Able to bear it became handle. And the whole thing drifted, one soft word at a time, until it landed on something the verse never said. God won't give you more than you can handle. I'll be honest with you. No one can point to the exact day it slipped into the language. Sayings like this don't have a birth certificate. But you can see the seams. You can watch a promise about temptation get sanded down into a slogan about stress, until a verse that was pointing at a door got turned around to point at you. And once it points at you, it stops being a comfort and starts being a bar you have to clear. It's a small change. It's also a cruel one, because now watch what it does. Take that sentence and carry it into the worst room of someone's life. A mother who has just lost a child. A man sitting in his car in the driveway, unable to go inside because inside is a marriage that just ended. You lean in and you say God won't give you more than you can handle. What have you just told them? You've told them, if this feels like more than you can handle, that's on you. Your faith must be too small. You're supposed to be strong enough for this. And look at you. So on top of the grief, they now carry a second weight, shame. The quiet, corrosive belief that being crushed is a spiritual failure. I think that's why this one matters so much. Not because it's a fun piece of trivia, but because a well-meaning sentence has quietly wounded a lot of people who were already on the floor. So here's the question that actually keeps you watching. If the Bible doesn't promise you'll always be strong enough, then what does it say for the night you're not? For the night, it really is more than you can handle. And this is where it gets good, because the Bible does not look away from that night. It has a man who lived it, and it lets him say so out loud, in a sentence most people have never heard, written by the very same man who wrote 1 Corinthians. His name is Paul, and a few years after he told the Corinthians they'd never be tempted beyond what they could bear, he sat down to write them again. Only this time, he wasn't teaching. He was bleeding. He never tells us exactly what happened. Something in Asia, and scholars still argue over it, a deadly illness, a stretch in prison, maybe the riot that nearly tore him apart in Ephesus. He doesn't give us the diagnosis. He only tells us what it did to him. And what it did is the thing the coffee mug swears can never happen. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 8. Listen to what Paul admits. We were pressed out of measure, above strength, insomuch that we despaired even of life. Stop on those two words. Above strength. In Greek, hyperdynamine, beyond our power, beyond what we could carry. Paul, the apostle, the man who wrote half the New Testament, is telling you in plain ink that he was handed more than he could handle. So much more that he says he despaired even of life. He had, in his own words, given up on living. So let that settle. The folk saying claims God never gives you more than you can bear. The actual Bible hands you a man who was given exactly that, and it does not hide it or soften it or scold him for it. It writes it down. Because the truth was never that you'd always be strong enough. You won't be. Some seasons will be more than you can handle. Paul's was. And then Paul tells you why. The very next verse. He says all of it happened, the crushing, the despair, all of it, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, which raiseth the dead. There it is. That's the whole reversal. The point of being given more than you can handle is not that you're strong enough. It's that you finally stop pretending you are. More than you can handle is exactly the place where you let go of your own grip and discover you were being held the entire time. The coffee mug version keeps the weight on you. Be strong enough. Paul's version takes the weight off you. You were never meant to carry this alone, and the moment you admit you can't is the moment God has been waiting for. That's the sentence for the hospital hallway. Not you can handle this. You might not, but you were never the one holding it up. And once you see it, you start finding it everywhere. Paul is not even the first. Turn back to Elijah, the great prophet, fresh off the biggest victory of his life, and you find him collapsed under a tree, in the desert, praying to die. It is enough, he says. Take away my life. That is a man past what he can handle. And God's response is not a lecture on strength. God lets him sleep, sends food, lets him say the quiet part out loud. That's the whole reply. Turn to Job, and it's an entire book of it. A man who loses everything in a week and spends 30 chapters saying so, out loud, to God's face. At one point, he begs for his grief to be put on a scale. Oh, that my grief were thoroughly weighed, he says. It would be heavier than the sand of the sea, heavier than he can lift, more than he can handle, measured out in his own words. And the Bible doesn't cut him off. It hands him the microphone and lets him finish. And then there's the one that should end every argument. The night before the cross, in a garden, Jesus himself says, and I want you to hear the actual words, "My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death," overwhelmed to the point of death. And he asks if there is any way for the cup to pass from him, the Son of God, praying for a lighter load. If being overwhelmed were a failure of faith, it would have failed right there, in that garden, in him. But watch what heaven sends. Not a smaller cup, Luke says, an angel came and strengthened him. That's the pattern. Every single time. God rarely makes the weight lighter. He meets you underneath it. That is the ekbasis. Not a life that never gets too heavy. A strength that shows up in the exact place yours runs out. If that just loosens something you've been carrying, I want to hear it. Was that line ever said to you? On a day you'll never forget. You don't have to write much. One sentence is enough. Somebody scrolling down these comments tonight is carrying the exact same weight, and they need to see they're not the only one. I read every single one. So what do you do with this? Practically, tonight, 2 things. First, if someone hands you that line while you're on the floor, you're allowed to set it down. It isn't scripture. You are not failing God by finding your life too heavy. Being overwhelmed is not a sin. Paul was overwhelmed, and God called him faithful in the same breath. I know how quietly that lie works, because I've watched it work. The father who buried a son and decided, somewhere in the years after, that his crushing grief meant his faith had cracked. The nurse coming off a 3rd double shift, who cried in her car, and then apologized to God for crying. The widow who sat in a pew every Sunday performing fine, because she'd been told a strong believer would be handling this better by now. None of them were failing. Every one of them was doing exactly what Elijah did under that tree, what Job did in the ashes, what Jesus did in the garden. They were being honest about a weight that was real. And in the Bible, that honesty is never the end of faith. It's the doorway back into it. And second, this is the one to keep. The next time you're standing beside someone in their worst hour, you don't have to reach for the mug. You can say the truer thing. Not you can handle this. Try. You might not be able to carry this. You were never supposed to carry it alone. Or say even less, sometimes the most biblical thing you can offer isn't a verse at all. It's what God gave Elijah. You sit down next to them. You bring them something to eat. You stay while they sleep. You let them say, "This is too much," without rushing to fix it. That is not a lack of faith. That is you being the door someone gets to walk through. That sentence, that meal, that silence, it doesn't crush people. It holds the way open. It's an ekbasis. We turned a promise about a door into a lecture about your own strength. And a lot of tired people have been quietly failing a test the Bible never gave them. So take the real one home. The next time the weight is more than you can carry, and one day it will be, you don't have to add shame on top of it. You don't have to perform fine. You get to do the bravest, most biblical thing there is. Say it out loud, the way Elijah did, the way Job did, the way Jesus did in the dark. This is too much. And then wait for the door. Because in the oldest, most honest corner of the Bible, more than you can handle is not where your faith ends. It's the exact place it finally stops leaning on you and starts leaning on the only one who was ever strong enough to hold it. There's another verse we've done the same thing to. A promise on 1,000 walls that was never written to you and is better because of it. I'll show you that one next.